Sony වසර 3ක වගකීම සමග සිංග වෙතින්ම පමණයි.
Yesterday, the New York Times carried an expose written by Maria Abi Habib, its South Asia correspondent, under the title How China Got Sri Lanka to Cough Up a Port. The expose talks about several things, from how the previous government disregarded recommendations by various international and local experts who said that the Hambantota port project would not be financially viable. The expose quotes the former Indian Foreign Secretary Shiva Shankar Menon as saying, "They approached us for the port at the beginning. An Indian company said no, it was an economic dud then, and it's an economic dud now." The main areas of focus on the expose breaks down into several points. Mainly, it speaks about how the Chinese government funded the botched presidential campaign of former President Mahinda Rajapaksa in 2015 in order to ensure that their agreement with the Rajapaksa regime continues without hindrance. It also speaks about how China agreed to provide financial support to the Hambantota port under the guise of getting a strategic upper hand military and financially that would enable them to operate at the doorstep of India. Further, it says when Sri Lanka couldn't make the intended financial profits from these projects, how China came as its saving grace, but with harsher dealings and demands that would profit China at the end.
It was a commercial transaction which the government of the day deemed to be beneficial to Sri Lanka. There was certainly no question of a threat. This is an absolute insult to the government of China. China does not deal with other countries in that way, nor does Sri Lanka as a sovereign state succumb to threats of any sort. It is an astonishing fabrication. So all we have to say is that these are desperate attempts on the part of the current government to distract public attention from a series of scandals which have rocked the government to its foundations. With every passing day, more and more layers of the central bank scam are coming to light. Sums of this magnitude had been paid into accounts here. There would be a paper trail.
The article further goes on to say that under the Rajapaksa regime, the country's debt had increased therefold to $44.8 billion when he left office.
This article tries to give the impression that China lended money at very high interest rates. Again, factually incorrect, because it's only the first tranche of 300 million or so, which came at about 6% interest, which is high, of course. But thereafter, they gave the balance at such low rates, the overall interest, average interest came to about 3.2%. How much money was borrowed for this? It is $1,250 million. And with accumulated interest, the total amount that was to be repaid to China after about 27 years was $1,750 million. When this government came to power in 2015, the Ports Authority has already repaid almost $500 million out of that. So that by that time, the port had been functioning only for 2 or 3 years. It had barely started making money. Still, $500 million were already repaid. So what's the problem? If the port was functioning, within 6 or 7 years, the total amount would have been repaid.
In an email communication with First at 9, New York Times correspondent Maria Abi Habib said that it is the responsibility of the previous government to provide responses to these allegations, despite her failing to obtain their response.
If you read through the article, you will realize that it is a two-pronged attack, one on China, the other one on Sri Lanka. Mainly on China, because I think this particular newspaper or this reporter wishes to show China as one of these really terrible countries which has gone and taken over other countries, and shown Sri Lanka as being a country that had got trapped into providing them with the assets as a result of the debt overtaking them, both of which are untrue.
Speaking exclusively to First at 9, the former governor of the central bank, Ajit Niwad Cabraal, says that the previous government did the needful assessment prior to commissioning the port.
There was never anyone saying that the Hambantota port was a dud project. It is one of the most important projects, and that is why the Chinese are willing to pay $1 billion and take it over today. If it was, who is going to pay $1 billion and take over a project which is a dud? So that's actually a canard. And that is being said in order to sell it. This government sold that port. And to sell the port, they sold the story to the country to saying it is a dud project.
I think one thing is very clear, that we got into debts to do with the Hambantota port and the Hambantota airport, which were not economically viable. These were Belt Road initiatives taken by China, right? And we should never get into debt on economically and financially non-viable projects. The Chinese subsequently invested in a terminal in the port of Colombo, which was a very commercially viable investment. And that investment, the Chinese investment, is doing very well. So it is a pre-BRI lesson that there should be investments only where there should be commercial returns. We must remember that not only borrowers, lenders are also responsible when they give money. So we were in this unenviable position that we had large debts that had to be serviced without any returns. The present government took the debt and converted it to equity. So these were very poor decisions taken by the former regime, right? And there are lessons to everybody in this, not just to Sri Lanka, even to the lenders, that this kind of situation must not arise in the future.
However, despite this, expose tries to showcase that Sri Lanka is under China's thumb when it comes to the amount of debt owed to China. The central bank report for 2017 shows that it's only a mere 4.2% of the total debt.
The article states that Sri Lanka is now more in debt to China than ever before. The reality is a bit more complicated. Certainly, Sri Lanka has a debt problem. However, of the high level of debt that it has, only a relatively small percentage still is owned by China. So the numbers are approximately 3.5 to 4 billion of debt, which comes to around approximately 6% of total debt. Now that may increase, and we certainly have to watch our debt repayment capacity.
Dr. Panditaratna further emphasized that it is important for governments to consider the processes and terms when obtaining loans, and it is therefore necessary to set clear standards when dealing with relevant countries.
My own view is that the article presents quite detailed evidence of self-dealing, and it's important to investigate all such claims of self-dealing. I mean, self-dealing, whether in the context of a corporation or of a national government, is never a good thing. It's something that is against the larger national interest. And it's not really a question of politics, it's a question of principle. Amount of China's debt is often overstated. That said, it's not so much a question of amounts as about the processes and the terms of the loans. It's in Sri Lanka's interest to pursue and set clear standards of how they go about getting loans from any source. And right now, we are somewhat lacking in that. And one thing that Sri Lanka can do is to insist that China sticks to its own standards, in a way, the AIIB standards.